Act 4.
You are listening to a story of America's First Christmas, as written by author John Antel and described in his book 7 Leadership Lessons of the American Revolution. The primary parts of this story are read by John Antel as George Washington, Jeff Bolton as narrator, and Edward Braze as Henry Knox and Colonel Rahl. It is the day after Christmas, and Washington's army is marching on Trenton. It is now 8 a.m., the sun is up, and the 2 separate American columns have converged on the town. The snow is blowing hard. The wind is chilling, especially to men whose clothes are wet from rain, snow, and sweat. Suddenly, as if by some unseen force, the winds die down. The snowfall decreases. Washington can now see up to 100 yards. From a small rise north of the town, Washington sees Trenton lying before him. He doesn't see any Hessians. Not a single German stands in formation, ready for the fight.
Quickly, lads, deploy to line of battle. Colonel Knox, deploy your cannon.
At the double quick, officers form their men into line formation on a slight rise at the edge of the town. Colonel Knox bellows commands, and his men manhandle their cannon into firing positions. General Washington sees smoke coming from the chimneys of the houses.
Cannon ready, General.
Henry, start the ball. Fire!
Knox's cannon fire, one shot after another. Cannonballs smash into houses that are filled with sleeping Hessian troops. Dazed Hessians pour out of the buildings, half-dressed, many without weapons. Washington hears the sound of the cannon fire to the south, and his face lights up. General Sullivan's guns were greeting the Hessians as well. It was time to launch the attack.
Advance and charge!
With a mighty huzzah, the Americans charge at full run into the Trenton. They meet the Hessians with buttstroke and bayonet, cutting the enemy down before the Germans know what has hit them.
March on, my brave fellows, after me!
General Washington spurs his horse and charges into the fight, sword in hand, slashing at the Hessians, who were unlucky enough to be in his way.
Stay with your officers, men! For God's sake, stay with your officers!
The Americans rush through the town, firing from house to house, rousting Hessians from their beds and catching many of them literally with their pants down. In the center of the village, Hessian drums and bugles sound the alarm. Colonel Rahl calmly dresses, finds his horse, mounts, and tries to rally his beleaguered men. He vainly tries to form them into a firing line. The well-drilled Hessian soldiers try to obey his orders, but the chaos is great. Hessian officers yell and curse, but to no avail, as the Americans are right upon them. A Hessian gun crew tries to get their cannon into the battle, but the rampaging Americans quickly capture the gun and crew. Believing that he is surrounded, and finding American forces already deep inside Trenton, Rahl gathers every Hessian grenadier he can into an open field. His intention is to counterattack and drive the rebels from the town. He then leads his men forward right into a wall of American fire from the Americans. As Rahl's men recoil from this storm of lead, one of Washington's riflemen hits Rahl with a well-aimed rifle shot. At nearly the same time, a second American rifleman shoots Rahl in his side, hit twice. Rahl falls from his horse, mortally wounded. The remaining Hessians run for a nearby orchard. Facing volleys of American musket lead fire and smashed to bits by the crash of Henry Knox's cannonballs, the leaderless Hessians decide to lay down their arms. By 9:30 a.m., the fighting in Trenton is over, and the Hessians have surrendered. The American victory is magnificent. In roughly 90 minutes of fighting amongst the 100 or so houses that make up the village of Trenton, Washington and his ragtag army of patriots has defeated the shock troops of the British Empire. As the smoke clears and prisoners are rounded up, Colonel Knox approaches General Washington to make his report of battle.
General Washington, I have the battle tally, sir.
Please, Colonel Knox, report.
Sir, I am pleased to inform you that the Hessians suffered 22 dead, 92 wounded, and we captured 948. Colonel Rahl is badly wounded and has been evacuated to a nearby house. I don't think he'll last the day. We have captured 6 cannon and all their supplies, including 1,000 muskets and rifles, sir, and much-needed ammunition. We also captured the entire Hessian commissary, consisting of tons of flour, dried and salted meat, ales and other liquors, but more importantly, shoes, boots, clothing, and bedding, all the things that we need for our men and our horses.
Very good. And our casualties?
Sir, it's truly a miracle. We have not lost a single man. Several officers and men were wounded, but none killed. Our battle is magnificent.
Yes, due to our officers and the men who never quit. This is a glorious day for our country.
Washington's masterstroke has succeeded. in spite of tremendous odds against him. Rawle did not order his men to stand at arms on the morning after Christmas because many of them were up all night chasing the New Jersey militia who raided one of their barracks houses. With most of his men exhausted and soaked with rain and snow, Rawle canceled his customary stand at arms at dawn order and allowed his men to sleep in. By midday on the day after Christmas, Washington has won a tremendous victory. Not waiting for the British to launch a counterattack, he swiftly moves his force back to the river and crosses back to the Pennsylvania shore. The American army brings all their Hessian prisoners with them. The Americans know that the Hessians have come to steal their liberty, and many an American soldier has seen the Hessians mercilessly bayonet American wounded and prisoners. But under strict orders from General Washington, the Hessian prisoners are treated by the rules of war and are not harmed, although many are removed of their fancy boots and jackets, so that the Americans can find a little more warmth on the march back. Before nightfall, Glover's Marblehead seamen row Washington's footsore and tired army and all the captured booty and prisoners across the Delaware River to the safety of Pennsylvania. And that is the true story of America's first Christmas. Washington and his army of amateur soldiers won the day at Trenton. Washington then convinced his soldiers to re-enlist, crossed the Delaware River again, fought the British again at the Second Battle of Trenton, and then on 3 January 1777, won another victory at Princeton. The victories of Trenton and Princeton boosted American morale, opened up New Jersey for recruiting to the American cause, and brought praise and much-needed supplies to the Americans from France, Britain's perpetual enemy. Later, a story developed that the Hessians were drunk at Trenton on the morning when Washington attacked. Those stories are not true. The Hessians were worn out, not drunk, and fought bravely, if in vain. Frederick the Great, the King of Prussia, and considered the greatest soldier of his time, reported that Washington's victory at Trenton and Princeton was the most brilliant campaign of the century. Outnumbered and on the verge of defeat, Washington had reversed the course of the war and had beaten the best units in the British Army. It is no exaggeration to conclude that Washington's resolute and determined leadership at Trenton and Princeton saved the American Republic. A note on the book, 7 Leadership Lessons of the American Revolution, by John Antel. Leadership, discipline, responsibility, determination, liberty. These were just some of Washington's leadership values. Most importantly, Washington knew that real leaders never quit. The United States would not exist today if Washington had quit. Nearly everyone else believed the cause to be lost, but not George Washington. This was the gift that Washington and his army gave the nation for America's first Christmas, the example of leadership and the chance to be free, the chance for liberty. Americans should never forget that liberty is never more than one generation away from extinction. It is never guaranteed. It must be fought for, struggled for, protected, and then handed on from one generation to the next. He wishes to thank Jeff Bolton, who was essential to this radio show and who played the voice of the narrator. He also wishes to thank Command Sergeant Major, U.S. Army Retired Edward Brace, for being the voice of Henry Knox and Colonel Rawle. Thank you. Merry Christmas. And let us pray that we never forget the legions of heroes like George Washington and his army for the liberty we enjoy today in the United States of America.